Greetings to all KNBK members, and welcome and thank you very much for joining us today for the first KNBK lecture by Carl Long Hanshi. We are really happy to see and spend time with you, our fellow family, this way. Even I wish I can see you personally, in person, but this is the next best thing, so I am really happy. And I hope you and your family are doing well. First, I would like to thank Long Sensei for agreeing to provide video lecture for us. And we are very grateful to this opportunity to continue to learn more from you. And I also want to thank people who have provided their support in various ways to make this happen. Thank you very much. That's including all of you. Thank you. And before we continue the lecture, I would like to go over the lecture room guideline. So please remember the use of recording device is strictly prohibited.
Paco, could you have them mute their
Yes.
their microphones?
Could you please mute your microphone? Because we're hearing the background noise right now. Thank you. So as I said, the recording device is strictly prohibited. You cannot share any portion of the lecture without Long Sensei's approval. And also, right now, make your microphone mute during the Long Sensei's lecture so we can hear better and for the respect for the other participants. And during this lecture, please utilize chat feature, which is on the bottom. Can you guys see where the chat module on your screen? If you go to the bottom of your Zoom, there is a feature called chat. If you have any questions during the lecture, please type it. I will compile all your questions so we can ask Sensei during the Q&A session. And then also during the Q&A session, at the end, please use the raise hand functions if you would like to ask Sensei questions. So again, that is also on the bottom where you call reaction. You can go thumbs up or wave hands or clap. You can use the wave hand feature to utilize as a raising hand. Do you have any questions so far on the Zoom functions? And then you have an opportunity, choice to see everyone as a Brady Bunch, or you can just see Long Sensei's face and the lecture material. It's up to you. That's your choice. Okay. If you have any questions, please utilize the chat module to send the message. And myself and other people will try to help you as much as we can during the lecture. Okay. So any questions so far? Okay. Okay, now it is my honor to introduce our Soshihan, Carl Long Hanshi. And thank you, Long Sensei, for taking this time to share your knowledge and helping us to learn more and to go through what we have to do. And with that, I will be giving the floor to Long Sensei.
Hey, hello everybody. Welcome. Great to see everyone again. It's been a tough couple months for all of us, and some of us a whole lot worse than others, I'm sure. I'm really hoping that the COVID-19 has not affected or taken anyone from us. I know some of our family members we've lost in the group, and it's been really tough. So my sincere condolences if you've lost anyone, and my sincere blessings. Hopefully that we can get through all this and get back to regular training and hard work in very short order. And I want to acknowledge the new members that I haven't met yet. I'm sure we've been running into each other on Facebook, or possibly just your new members, and I haven't had a chance to meet you on the floor yet. But I want you to know that I'm really, really looking forward to it. You are the next generation, and I think that's going to be very apparent as we get through this this little bit of a talk we have going today. I want to tell you that we have people here from all around the globe with us today. Obviously, we have some folks that haven't joined us yet, might be getting in late, and I'm sure that Lee Sensei will handle those people when they come in. I'd like to explain to you how this all began. Our seniors and some of our members over some chats have requested that I do this. I'm sure that they know they have their own dojos. You know what it's like. We've had to no finances coming in from the dojo or here at Hambu either. You know, with the classes going on for the last 3 months. So they also, I'm sure they wanted to have a little bit of financial support for Hambu here. Since we have no seminars in sight in person this year yet, everything's been on hold. So Zoom seminars we thought might help. Actually, they thought it might help. And after much consternation and prodding by senseis like John Stone, Warzik, Thomas, Lee, they said that they'd like a forum for questions and answers, because I wasn't too thrilled about it. We're a Koru group. Most things are passed on from heart to heart, person to person. And so this is a bit of a stretch for us, but I'm hoping that we can get through some things for you and we can make it worthwhile. And if nothing else, I get to reach out and touch each one of you, and you can get to know your KNBK family a little bit better as well. I want to thank Lee Sensei in particular. She's done a lot of work with this Zoom. She's put this whole thing together for our group, and she's done it on her own dime, just because she thinks that it's important that we stay together as a family. As I said, MJER is heart to heart, and so let's try and reach out and touch each other a little bit more often if we can. I want to apologize. As part of this presentation, a lot of it is a PowerPoint presentation, and they've drugged me kicking and screaming into the 21st century here, probably the 20th century, because I missed that apparently in technology. So as I was putting this together for you, I was also in the process of learning PowerPoint this past week, up until literally about 3 hours ago. And as far as Zoom goes, I'm just totally a dinosaur. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me a little bit. I'm sure that there's going to be some glitches, but hopefully you'll be kind. And I'll promise you I'll be as kind when we get together on the floor too. How's that? Is it a deal? Okay. All right. What I'd like to do is I'd like to go to our next part of the presentation. And so if you just give me a second here, I think I can do this. How are we? Are we in? Can anybody tell? We're there. Oh, okay, great. So I just like to welcome everybody. I'm not sure how this will go, but you're gonna have to forgive me for my skills. I'm sure we're gonna be gremlins, and you know Murphy's Law is sure to come into play here someplace. So I appreciate your patience. Your contributions, by the way, to this pilot lecture is going to aid in the funding of the dojo while we reopen our programs here after the pandemic closings. I'm mindful that what you're about to learn might seem extremely boring from time to time, but it's my opinion that the information in this first lecture will help prepare you and hopefully deepen your understanding of who we are, where we came from, and quite possibly why you're training. This is such an important legacy and treasure that we're doing. And each of you is a steward of the martial art and the sword art that we practice. It's a tradition that's been passed down through 22 generations of men and women to you who are now the keepers of the flame. So let me begin with what you can expect in this upcoming lecture, if in the end you believe it's worth doing, okay? If we end up doing more. So lecture number 1 series, it's basically TOSA history and origins of MJER. So as we go through here, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of background information that may seem a little bit more historical, but I'll tell you about that in a little bit, okay? There are going to be 3 basic categories I hope we'll be able to explore in the lectures. And it's imperative to know the history and philosophy that led to the development of what we now know as Muso, Jikiden, and Eishin. One of the things that I asked 2 of my teachers many, many years ago, I talked to Kaminoda Sensei, who was a Menkyo Kaiden of Jodo, and I talked to Miura Sensei, who was the 20th generation Grandmaster of our MGER. I asked them both the same question. I thought it was going to be kind of cute when I asked it. And what I said was, Sensei, if you could look at all the students over all the years that you've been training, and you could throw all those students into one bunch, obviously some people have stayed and some people have left. Could you give me an idea of what did the people that stayed have in common? What was it that made them stick with their koru, their Budo, for so many years? And without skipping a beat, on 2 separate occasions in 2 separate parts of the world, they both gave me the exact same answer within 3 months of each other. And what they said was, the people who stayed had a deep appreciation and understanding of the history of what they were doing. There were many people who were more talented physically. There were people who were younger, older. It didn't matter what part of their life they started in, but if they had a deep appreciation of the history, they stuck with it because they realized that they were a part of something that was much bigger than them as individuals. Something that outlived them for 500 years or more, and will hopefully live past them in that period of time. So they had a deeper understanding. So this lecture is particularly focused on the influences of Oe Masamichi Shikei. He was the 17th headmaster of our style of swordsmanship. He was the last samurai headmaster of our style. Also, in the upcoming lections, we're going to do work on technical answers. So in the future lectures, we expect to explore technical aspects that are unique to our branch of Eishin. We'll look at the signature movements and the waza that define our methods of swordsmanship and strategy. So if in the future lectures, we'll probably have some videos of techniques and live examples and answers to your technical questions as we move on. We'll have more moving video for you. Also, the questions posed by students. I'll attempt to answer questions that have been submitted by our members prior to communications and future emails as they come in. In the future, we can have interactive discussions here in real time for questions and answers. I'd like some of that today after this brief PowerPoint slide, if we can. So, let's get right to it. History of Muso, Jikiden, and Eishin. During the first half of the 17th century, Japan was divided and ruled by 10 daimyo under the direction of Tokugawa shogunate. So if you look at the map here, I don't know, can you see my cursor, everybody? Just shake your head, I can see. Okay, so this map is a map of Japan in around 1664 under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate. And you'll see right here, one of those provinces, okay, one of those provinces was called Tosa Han. Can you see it? Okay. So today's Tosa's history and leadership is vital to understanding the philosophical and the technical development of our Muso Jikiden nation in the Edo period of Japan. The province of Tosa was on the island of Shikoku. So if you look here, you're going to see all of Shikoku Island. And Shikoku was in the southern region, as we showed before. The domain's castle town was Kochi, right here. See it? Tosahan, and this was the main, the dark area here is all Tosahan, and this little city here is Kochi City. That was the main capital. So Tosa was under the rule of the shogunate for around 260 years. Tosa Kuni, which was a country, later became under the Tokugawa called Tosa Han, which was a province, and it was inhabited by the Chosukobe clan, which was the clan that actually was running Tosa at the time. They had their own daimyo as well. The early daimyo of Tosa, the early daimyo and ruler of Tosa was a samurai named Chosukobe Motochika. Okay. Chosukobe was, the Chosukobe people were on the losing side of the war at the Battle of Sekigahara that gave power to Tokugawa Ieyasu, who became shogun. One of Tokugawa's allies in the war was a samurai named Yamauchi. And the Yamauchi samurai, the clan leader was Yamauchi Kazutoyo. And he was from the province of Owari, which is, if you look at Owari, it's kind of across from Shikoku, up in the middle section of Japan. It's now called modern Aichi Prefecture. And that's Yamauchi Kazutoyo. He was alive from 1545 to 1605. Tokugawa Ieyasu awarded Tosahan to the Yamauchi daimyo for his service and loyalty throughout the war. The Tokugawa loyalist retainers were given a land even in every conquered region. Let me go back to that a second. So if you look here, so he was actually inspired by his wife, as most of us are, I guess, those of us who have it. His wife actually was considered the main push and the main mentor in his entire career as a daimyo. And so if you go to Tosa today, there are actually statues erected to his wife for all that she had done. The Tokugawa loyalist retainers were given land in every conquered region. This was to oversee and report back to the shogun what was going on there. The Yamauchi takeover of Tosa territory was somewhat violent, involving forcible pacification and armed resistance by those loyal to the Chosukabe. So the Chosukabe loyalists were constantly fighting back against the Yamauchi when they were trying to take over. It got very bloody and many, many people died. When the Yamauchi took over control in Tosa, as a sign of good faith to the shogun, they eliminated literally hundreds of Chosukabe samurai. Then, as proof, they sent 270 Chosukabe heads by boat back up to Edo to show the new shogun that they were in complete control of the Tosa domain. Now, the reason they sent 260 heads was because the boat couldn't fit any more heads on it with the crew and Yamauchi samurai passengers. Yeah. And they did a pretty good job because they'd ruled Tosa for the next 260 years.
Wow.
The Tosa domain initially maintained a number of regional castles, assigning most of them to high-ranking retainers around the country as the seats for their sub-fiefs. And in 1600, Kochi Castle was constructed in what was then the province of Tosa, as you saw on the maps. It was built by Yamanouchi Kazutoyo, the first Yamauchi warlord, daimyo there. And all the other castles in Tosa had to be destroyed in the year 1616 as a result of Tokugawa shogunate's edict of one country, one castle. So he had 10 provinces, each one was only allowed to have one castle. That way it was a lot easier to control them if they tried to revolt. You only had to ever conquer one castle. You didn't have to conquer all of them. So they destroyed all the other castles in Tosa, and then they only left Kochi Castle, which by the way is still there today. But in some parts of the domain, fortified samurai residences or small districts remain the centers of those regional merchant towns. And that's pretty important as many of them stayed there, the ones that survived the siege. Many of the Chosokabe samurai had come from the merchants and the farmer class, and that had gained, they had gained wealth through lumber sales or grain and rice production. It was very rural there, and this provided most of them enough, or a lot of them, enough money to buy their family, quote unquote, samurai status. And those samurai were called Ichiro Gosoku, and they were thought of as low-rank samurai under the rule of Hideyoshi from earlier on during the Warring States period. Their samurai families were commonly referred to as goshi, or country samurai. And these country samurai became a caste within a caste in the newly ruled Yamauchi daimyo's administration. The Yamauchi samurai considered themselves more cultured and urbanized than their conquered goshi brothers, well, their newfound brothers and sisters. They began basically a country versus urban samurai conflict that continued in various forms throughout the next 260 years. And if the truth be told, it's still evident in Tosa styles that we all practice and have been passed on even today throughout the world. The surviving Chosokabe samurai became second-class samurai to the Yamanouchi. And the Yamauchi were more loyalist to the Tokugawa shogun, but even though they were all together now, they were still considered second-rate samurai. And the truth is, at that time in Tosa, if a Chosokabe samurai were to say anything wrong or out of line to a Yamauchi samurai, he could be cut down on the spot. So they actually really took a second place for many, many, many years, even in Tosa, even though they were all serving under Tokugawa at the time. Many of the Chosokabe samurai, they had to forfeit much of their lands and possessions to the Yamanouchi. All of them served the shogunate now in Tosa Castle under Yamauchi daimyo. And so samurai factions on both sides, they conducted military training, whether it was Yamauchi or Chosokabe. They did all their military training in the Tosa dojos under the Yamauchi's daimyo's rule. So even though they were coming from different places, they trained in different styles up to this point, they were still now training as Tosa samurai under the daimyo rule. And various forms of swordsmanship were practiced at the time and adapted. They actively trained in sword, the spear, archery, horsemanship, and other buge warrior arts. The sword traditions of the Warring States period are listed at that time were listed over 600 separate styles. 600 separate styles, and many were changed and adapted, or some of them were completely or entirely lost over the next 200 years of the Edo period. Lee Sensei, you have a question?
Yes.
This question is coming from Robert McGurl. First question is, Tosa Han was very pro-emperor and anti-shogunate. Does this stem from the loss at Sekigahara that resulted in the Han being handed over to the Yamauchi?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time, Kako?
Yes. Tosa Han was very pro-emperor and anti-shogunate. Does this stem from the loss at Sekigahara that resulted in the Han being handed over to the Yamauchi?
Well, of course, if you had 260 of your fellow townspeople's heads plus taken and sent up to Edo, I'm sure that there was probably a little bit of resentment left in the Han over that. Sekigahara was not really at the end. It's not really at the end of the Edo period. It's not really what changed the Chokokabe or the Yamauchi. Over a period of time, they really started to join more together. But yeah, because of our system, came down in a separate line and then split later on, then they did have a little bit of resentment, but it was more from the day-to-day repression. Sekigahara.
Okay. Follow-up question is, after the Han was handed over, the Yamauchi moved in and then Chosokabe became Goshi, country samurai.
Correct.
I remember being told that when the Omori-ryu waza were incorporated into the line, it was to teach the country samurai some manners. Does this mean that now dominant Yamauchi were taught to need the Omori-ryu etiquette or the descendant of the oust Chosokabe?
Okay, so so the timeline didn't happen quite that compressed. After the Yamauchi took over Tosa, the Chosokabe, there was Shinkage-ryu being taught there. There was Kokuri-ryu being taught there. There were many other styles being taught there. Omori-ryu was not one of them. And it wasn't until about the mid-1600s, about 50 years to 60 years later, that they started to learn the Omori-ryu in Tosa. By that time, you know, the Yamauchi and the Tosa were both going back and forth to Edo in the service of the Tokugawa shogunate. And so it wasn't just the imperial court, but they had to learn how to be good in Edo as well. And so Omori sensei was one of the students of Eishin sensei up in Edo, and he ended up moving back down to Tosa as well. But it was really about more for the court etiquette of everyone in Edo.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, let me move on here a little bit, guys, if you don't mind. Tokugawa Ieyasu was well known for disarming his retainers. He had many edicts. He, as he said, he cut down on the number of castles. He issued edicts disallowing townsmen or farmers to actually carry long swords very early on. And this continual further restriction continued to strengthen throughout the next 50 years of the Tokugawa shogunate, even under Ieyasu's descendants, his children, as they took over. Several changes in the length of and wearing of swords was developed, and the old sword styles were forced to adapt to these changes, such as wearing a katana rather than a tachi. The tachi, if you look here, was a long sword, and it was worn. Can everybody hear me there? Kako, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The tachi was worn hung from the belt from the left side of the armor with a blade facing downward. Can you see that? Okay. The katana was a shorter sword that was worn with the blade facing upward. And so when he cut down on the size of the long sword, they had to start wearing it thrust through the obi like that on the left side. The seventh generation headmaster of Tosa Eishin, who was up in Edo at the time, began to adapt the wearing style of the katana to these new edicts. and he altered the original drawing methods that had been passed down in the Tosa Eishin-ryu. And what we discuss is this is important innovation. Hasegawa Eishin-ryu, we'll talk about a little bit more in a future lesson when we talk about him. But this really was one of the defining moments in the change of how we perform Nukitsuke and how we draw the sword. Lisa, do you have something else?
Yes. Sorry for this. Next question is come from Del Lucent. Did most samurai in the Edo period wear katana with tsukagashira pointed at the 45-degree angle, or was it unique to practitioner of our style? If it was unique, was Tosa samurai concerned with standing out when wearing their swords on, say, a crowded street, or was that not important?
Okay, so when we're performing our waza, when we're doing our waza, the sword sits at a 45-degree angle, and that was an innovation that was developed by Eishin sensei. Now, different lines of the Eishin-ryu, that angle changes a little bit. Sometimes they put the tsukagashira on the center line. In our line, we put the inside of the suba on the center line. But in normal day-to-day activity, moving around, usually the sword was moved over to the left, or sometimes it was pulled up. There's also a method that we use that we take, and with two swords, you do a cross, and they actually lock in place so you can eat. They're not in your way. So if you're walking down the street, obviously you're going to turn it a little bit more to the left, depending upon how you're wearing it. Now we also wear our in Tosa in particular, the Chosokabe. They wore not a wakizashi, but they wore what was called a yoroi doshi, which was an armor-piercing tanto, and that was worn in the front, straight across the belly. It was called yoroi doshi or maizashi. Mai meaning across the front. Wakizashi means to the side. So it wasn't worn. So wakizashi doesn't mean this a little sword. Wakizashi is how you wear a sword. Waki means to the side. Zashi means to insert. So wakizashi is any sword that is inserted to the side under a certain length. Maizashi is any sword that's straight across the front. And usually it's a much smaller blade that way. And we used what was called a yoroi doshi, which was about that big, across the belly, which allowed then for the katana to come a little bit more toward the center.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So in the mid-1600s, the samurai of Tosa, they began training in the sword art of Hasegawa Eishin. That was the mid-1600s. So, 50, 60 years went by. And the style was brought back to Tosa from Edo by a gentleman named Hayashi Rokudayu. And if you look, that's a Rokudayu. He's the 9th generation of our style. And he was a retainer. Hayashi Sensei was a retainer and of the Yamauchi daimyo. He served the daimyo as his cook and his quartermaster. And he actually inherited the Eishin-ryu style while he was a student up in Edo. He was training with the Eishin sensei and his other teacher until he moved back down to Tosa with Yamauchi daimyo. After he brought back Hasegawa Eishin-ryu to Tosa, he was appointed as the sword master to all of the Yamauchi clan. And at that time, the Hayashi family, which he was heading, the Hayashi family were headmasters of Tosa Eishin-ryu. Just so you know how much pull they had, they were headmasters for the next four out of the 6 generations. So for the next 6 generations, 4 of those were Hayashi actually direct family members, and the other 2 were adopted nephews or had married into the family. So when they say it's a family style, it's only because they were in Tosa at the time. Prior to that, the style was never a family. We don't have what's called Ishi Soden. Okay, So there's no soke like that. There never has been. It just happened to be that they had a lot of political pull with the Yamauchi. If you look here, this is Hayashi Rokudayu, and this was his son. Then it skipped to the next generation came down, and he was an adopted family member because there was no sons. And then it went back to Hayashi Masanori, and you're going to hear about him a little bit here in the future. Then Yodo Sensei, and then back to the great grandson of Hayashi Rokudayu up there, all the way back. Okay, so that's the 6 generations that you're looking at right there. Sensei, you have another question?
Yes. Actually, not right now, Sensei.
Okay, all right, thank you. You bet. "250 years in anywhere can wash away a lot of bitterness when you live and die with other members of your country." And so, as I said, it wasn't a compressed time, it was a very long time. Imagine 2.5 centuries went by under the Tokugawa rule with the Yamauchi and now ruling the country. So alliances and families mingle and merge in that time. And the samurai families of Tosa did. When the Tokugawa regime finally weakened after about 250 years, many within Japan became very distrustful of opening up Japan when Admiral Perry came into Edo. And the shogun's weakness, they felt, allowed that to happen. He was a very weak ruler. They'd become very passive because things have been very peaceful for a long time. But the outlying provinces, you know, the hillbillies like me, that live out in the sticks, they were still pretty much hardliners, okay? And as the shogunate of the middle 1800s became a little bit weakened leadership, the samurai of the southern provinces in particular, which Tosa was a part of, they began to show more loyalty to the young Emperor Meiji in Kyoto. And Emperor Meiji was just a young teenager at the time. Actually, even before that, when they first started talking about it. And really, Emperor Meiji didn't rule anything at the time. It was the shogun and his cabinet in the court in Kyoto that were kind of overseeing and looking over Emperor Meiji. So just to put that in perspective, saying that they want to return power back to the emperor did not necessarily mean it was going to the emperor. It was going to a lot of people that they had a lot of control over, that had influence over the emperor as well, okay? So the provincial samurai throughout Japan had wished for a more open policy toward the rest of the world, but they wanted an equality with those who'd been suppressing their freedoms all this time, okay? This was Emperor Meiji. If you'll take a look at him, that's after he became a little bit older, and he was indoctrinated into the Western way of governing. The Tosa samurai, they formed an alliance with the samurai leaders of the Satsuma and the Choshu. Those were 2 other provinces, to overthrow the shogun and return power back to the emperor. They were called shishi, or men of high purpose, at least that's what they considered themselves, or anti-shogun forces. And they were formed by samurai of southwestern Choshu, Satsuma, and Tosa. If any of you remember the story of Saigo Takamori, he was the last samurai. Well, Tosa, Satsuma is where he came from, and Choshu were all together in those battles. So if you're ever watching Last Samurai, you'll know you're getting a little bit of our history there too, okay? even though Satsuma and Choshu were enemies at the beginning, the intervention of a man named Ryoma Sakamoto, who was from Tosa, he was a young man, very young man by the time, he made a possible a secret alliance between the Satsuma and the Choshu. They were at war for centuries, but he convinced them that their bigger enemy was sitting up in Edo, the shogun. Later, Ryoma, he made a lot of enemies, as you can imagine, under the Tokugawa shogun as people. And he was assassinated in Kyoto by what was called the Shinsengumi. The Shinsengumi were the secret police of the Tokugawa shogunate. There's some speculation later on, another secret service group came up, secret police said that they had done it, but it was done undercover. And he was actually assassinated in an inn in Kyoto. That inn still exists, by the way. It's now a restaurant. You can go there when you go to Japan and go to Kyoto, and you can sit there. He was actually being protected by a sumo wrestler who was his bodyguard on the first floor. And when he heard, he and his friend were upstairs, and when he heard the ruckus downstairs, he thought that the sumo wrestler was just probably drunk and getting into a contest with one of his friends. So Ryoma ran down, but as he did, the Shinsengumi ran through the door, sliced down the back of the sumo as he was trying to call out to Ryoma, and he pretty much died very quickly. Ryoma was cut literally. His friend upstairs was sliced up very badly. He survived 3 days, long enough to tell the story, but then he died after 3 days from all the cuts. Ryoma Sakamoto was quite a character. He left Tosa at an early age, and at that time you couldn't just go from one province to another province. You had to get permission to go from the Tokugawa shogun, or at least from the daimyo of your country. And so he just up and left, and he went to Edo under an assumed name, and he used that assumed name on and off throughout his career. And he trained in the sword style of Hokushin Itoryu in Edo. And eventually he came back. Now you have to realize at this point he's considered Ronin. Ryoma was considered Ronin, and he actually went to kill one of Tokugawa's counselors. He went to assassinate him. When he got there, this man's name was Katsukaishu. And when he got there, Katsukaishu was such a powerful personality that he explained to the Ryoma that the outside world is not a bad thing. The outside world is a good thing if you understand what it will do for your country. And Ryoma actually became one of his acolytes and students. When Ryoma went back down to Tosa, he convinced the Tosa samurai that this was something that they needed to get behind. Then he went over, then he talked to the Satsuma and the Choshu, and he put together the plan to start the rebellion. So I just think you should know a little bit about Ryoma. He's considered a great hero in Japan. He's considered the Robin Hood, so to speak, of Japan during the Meiji Restoration.
Yes.
Any questions? Kako?
There's a questions. One of them is just going back to previous pages. This question was forwarded to me by Matt Ubertini Sensei. Mm-hmm. He would like to ask a question about tsuka length preference of Tosa samurai.
I'm sorry?
The tsuka length preference.
The what preference?
Tsuka. The length of the tsuka.
The length of the tsuka, okay.
And he heard later on that Tosa samurai were identified by their tsuka length.
So it depends on what part of the Edo period you're talking about. So in the beginning part of the Edo period, there were many Tosa warriors doing many different styles. And also, there was no definition of how long your sword could be for many, many, many years. And so some parts of the clan would use long swords with a long tsuka. Some parts of the realm would use shorter tsuka. Those that preferred the longer swords were more coming from the Hayashizaki Shinmei line. And even today, some of the Eishin lines, the Tosa Eishin lines, they use a little bit longer sword, but there's only really one left today that does that I know of. Once the edict was passed that the swords were only, a katana was only allowed a certain length, that pretty much did it. In our style, tsuka should never be more than 1/3 the length of the sword itself.
Okay. There's another question.
Okay.
Were any of the famous anti-Bafuku rebels, like you just mentioned, the Sakamoto Ryoma, practitioners of our art, or were our headmasters closely linked with any? Were any involved in drafting the petition to the Tokugawa shogun requesting he step down?
Oh, okay, sure. Actually, one of the many many of our Tosa Eishinru practitioners were part of the rebellion and fought very strongly at both Sekigahara early on, and then during the Meiji Restoration, the Boshin War. And so one in particular who actually led a lot of the charges, he was one of the generals. He was at Kan Dojo, which is the main Tosa Eishinru dojo in Kochi City. He became quite a hero in Japan for what he did. And I'm going to talk about that here shortly. His name was Itagaki, and Itagaki Sensei was actually so popular afterwards that after he started reforming and setting the rules and regulations for the new Tokugawa regime, and I'll talk about him shortly, his face then appeared on the first printed money, Japanese money after the Meiji Restoration. That's how he was like a Hamilton or a George Washington.
Okay. No further question at this point, Sensei.
Okay, thank you. So the political divide between the Yamauchi daimyo and Tokugawa shogunate became very wide, as we were saying. The Yamauchi Yodo, he lived from 1827 to 1872, and Yodo was the Tosa clan daimyo prior to the revolt. So 250 years go by, many Yamauchi inherited the daimyo, just like the Tokugawa became inherited. And Yamauchi Yodo was the Tosa clan prior to the revolt. He was literally the 15th lord of the Tosa feudal clan. And during the last days of the Tokugawa government, he worked for the reconciliation of the imperial court and the shogunate. So basically, he knew where the writing was on the wall. And even though his family had always been supporters of the shogun, he knew that because of what was going on in southern Japan, but more importantly, while he suppressed the loyalist party in Tosa, he eventually took the advice of one of his retainers. His name was Shojiro Goto, and threw his weight behind the forces led by Sakamoto Ryoma and the Shushu. So Yamauchi Yodo, he was in support of the restoration of imperial rule. So in 1867, he was instrumental in putting an end to violence and upheaval that occurred with the passing of the Tokugawa government. So his word carried a lot of weight in Japan at that time. In 1868, pro-imperial Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa, and by that time had joined them. those southern forces, they overwhelmed the shogunal defenses at Edo in the capital, which is now Tokyo, and proclaimed Emperor Meiji as their leader of the country.
Sensei, before you move on, there's another question.
Sure.
When Ryoma returned to Tosa and began speaking with Tosa samurai, was the Yamauchi motivation for agreeing to rebel ever discussed? Being Tokugawa loyalists in the past, was there discontent with the weakness that shogunate had come to show?
So again, after 250 or so years, the Yamauchi became pretty strong and powerful. The shogun became very weak. So you have to understand that they weren't really in favor of opening things up to the West, although that was good. What they wanted was a more open and free democratic government. Not free of being samurai or daimyo, but they wanted more say in what went on and not just everything coming from Edo. So they wanted a little bit more say in the politics of the time. And so as Tosa got more powerful, the thought of having a voice led them more toward that direction. They listened to Sakugawa. There were many different committees formed in Tosa, and you're going to hear about that very shortly too, to join forces, to seek out allies, and decide whether that this was a feasible thing to do or not. Of course, they had to get allies first, right? So once the tide started to move that direction, the Yamauchi daimyo went that direction as well. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Oe Masamichi Shikei, he was born in 1852 and he lived until 1927, so that's 75 years. He was one of the most important headmasters of Tosa Eishin-ryu. He was the 17th Soshion, the 17th headmaster. And Oe was likely the most important influence to our modern practice today. In his earlier life, he studied Shinkage-ryu and Kokuri-ryu swordsmanship. The Kokuri-ryu was Kokuri-ryu swordsmanship was the basic swordsmanship that common samurai were allowed to study. That's like the first thing you would send a foot soldier to learn in Tosa. So Oe Sensei, like all others, would usually learn Kokuri-ryu or possibly Shinkage-ryu if they were a little bit more well connected. But Kokuri-ryu was the lower rank Tosa samurai style. Okay, just so so Oe Sensei, he enrolled in the teacher, his name was Benji Hineno's dojo. It was a martial arts school in Kochi town. And that's where he learned the swordsmanship of the Kokuri-ryu style that the lower rank samurai learned. Later, after that, he trained in Shinkage-ryu Kenjutsu. And then eventually, this is all under the age of 15 now, he went and he learned the Shimamura branch of Eishin-ryu in the capital city of Kochi. Oe, by the way, going back to the other question, Oe Sensei fought at the famous battle of Toba Fushimi. He was age 15 and he took part in a 4-day battle at Toba Fushimi, which was up toward Kyoto. And so that was toward the end of the Boshin War. The Tokugawa samurai forces had regrouped, were trying to make one last effort to take the shogunate again. And they marched from Osaka, they marched north into Kyoto. And they were trying to take over the city of Kyoto and take over the imperial palace. And Oe Sensei was sent up there. He was stationed there in the Tosa House. Tosa House is where our Tosa clan would go and serve the emperor in Kyoto. So they joined forces, and they defended the imperial city against the Tokugawa. And he and his teachers literally helped to end the Tokugawa shogunate right there. It was said that Oe Sensei, and this is very important because it plays into some of our waza, and it plays into his reformation of the style later on. He was said to have killed 6 men during that battle using his sword. So even though at that time there were firearms, there were flintlocks, there were matchlocks, even though he was still fighting at 15 years old with a sword and had killed 6 men. So you can get an idea. Actually, that battle, those 6 fights, some have said that when he reformed the curriculum, it helped him. He wanted to add what was like to be in a real fight. He was the last of our samurai headmasters that actually have fought in battle with the sword. And so what today we think of as known as the Bangai Nobu. The Bangai Nobu supposedly was an expression of Oe Sensei's idea of what real battle feels like when he was at the Toba Fushimi at the Clam Gate incident. So you can kind of pack that away for further reference, okay? So Oe Sensei, he lived at a time really after the Meiji Restoration. Most of his life, he was 15 in that area, teenager, but most of the time he lived after the Meiji Restoration. And this was a time of what they call the Haito Rei, and of wearing swords. And that was implemented by the Emperor Meiji's cabinet. There were many Haito Rei throughout history in Japan. Some were done by the Tokugawa, obviously. They wouldn't allow farmers or merchants to wear. They were allowed to wear swords at one point, then they completely were no longer allowed to wear swords. That happened under Emperor Meiji as well. First, they took away, all the peasants and merchants and farmers' swords. And then eventually, at this time, they took away the swords from the samurai too. They did away with the samurai caste. And Oe Sensei was part of that. He had to put down his swords after the Meiji Restoration. And so that edict created a very painful obstacle to the continuation of Iai and Koru Kenjutsu at that time. After the Battle of Toba Fushimi, Oe Sensei returned back home to Tosa. After that 15 years old battle, he went back to Tosa, and he returned to Tosa to further his Iai training in Tosa, in Eishin. Upon returning to Tosa, he studied Eishin Bojutsu, under a guy named, this might sound familiar, Itagaki Taisuke. Now, Itagaki Sensei was a Tosa samurai and statesman who led the liberal party in Tosa to reform. He was a samurai of Tosa Han, and he was a highly respected leader in the military as well. In fact, he'd studied Eishin swordsmanship and Kokoryu swordsmanship as a member of the clan, and as well he studied Eishin other Sogo Bujutsu, where he taught, literally, he taught at the Chiyokan Dojo in Kochi, where Oe Sensei started teaching and was studying when he went back to Tosa. So that's Itagaki Sensei as a young man. This is Oe Sensei is a very old man. He was only a teenager when he was studying with Itagaki Sensei. Itagaki Sensei was much, much older than he was. Just to give you an idea, Itagaki Sensei was born in 1837 and died in 1919. So he lived a very, very long life. And you have to remember the Meiji Restoration took place 1867 to 1868. Okay, so Itagaki sensei was born into a middle-ranking samurai family in Tosa, not really low-ranking, but a middle-ranking family. And after studies in Kochi and Edo, Itagaki sensei, he was appointed as what's called a sabayonin, or a counselor to the Tosa daimyo Yamauchi Toyoshugi. And he was in charge of all the accounts and military matters at the domain's Edo headquarters in 1861. So he went to Edo, and he was in charge of all the military matters that were centered around the Tokugawa capital, okay? He disagreed a lot with the domain's official policy of reconciliation between the imperial court and the Tokugawa shogunate. So he really supported the imperial side of it, and was not real happy about the shogun, and he didn't want to see them really getting along so well. And in 1867 and 1868, he met with Saigo Takamori. Remember Saigo Takamori from Satsuma? And he agreed to pledge Tosa's military forces in an effort to overthrow the shogun in the upcoming Meiji Restoration, in the Boshin War. And so during the Boshin War, Itagaki sensei emerged as the principal political figure from Tosa domain as a leader of what was called the Jinshotai Assault Force. And they were the #1 force pushing in the revolt during the Boshin War. And he claimed a place in the new Meiji government after the Tokugawa defeat, as I told you. And in 1874, he formed what was called the Public Party of Patriots. The Public Party of Patriots. And they were basically, they declared that, how do they put it? We, the 30 millions of people in Japan, are equally endowed with certain definitive rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life, liberty, acquiring and possessing property, and obtaining a livelihood and pursuing happiness. These rights by nature bestowed on all men, and therefore cannot be taken away by the power of any man. Does that sound familiar to any of you? You get to the idea that he might have been a real fan of the democratic societies. In fact, he was. He was a student and a great supporter and believer in the Parliament of the UK and the Constitution of the United States at that point. He was very much enamored of that. So this anti-government stance appealed to a lot of the discontented remnants of the old samurai class in the rural aristocracy, who resented the centralized taxation, and also peasants who were discontented with high prices and low wages. So Itagaki's involvement in the liberalism lent political legitimacy in Japan, and he became a leader of the push for democratic reform after the Meiji Restoration. He and his associations created a variety of organizations to fuse samurai ethos with Western liberalism, and to agitate everyone for a national assembly. He wanted a written constitution, and he wanted limits to arbitrary exercise of power by the government. So in 1882, Itagaki was almost assassinated by the right-wing militants. He allegedly said, when they came to assassinate him, he allegedly said, "Itagaki may die, but liberty never." Thankfully, they weren't successful in the assassination. And so that phrase caught on in Japan at the time. And his student, back in Tosa, his student, Oe Masamichi, was very much a student of this new reform party. And he looked to his seniors, Goto, Itagaki, as leading a new Japan of equality and equity for all. Just as an aside, Itagaki sensei's wife, so you know he had a lot of political power in Tosa, he had a lot of political power now outside, but getting back to Budo, Itagaki's wife actually was the daughter. His wife was the daughter of Tosa's domain's great samurai Hayashi Masanoju Masamori. He was the 12th Soshigan of Eishin-ryu. So he literally married the Eishin-ryu's headmaster's daughter. And so with Masanoju Hayashi being his father-in-law, Hayashi Masanoju was the 9th generation who brought it back from Edo to Tosa. This was his grandson's daughter. So this would be his great-granddaughter. Okay? So much of what became of a lot of the teaching he taught at the Chidokan Dojo, and he was famous for the Bojutsu in particular, that the Eishin Bojutsu. And so much of what became of the Bojutsu practice later was likely descended from Itagaki Sensei. His guidance prompted Oi Sensei to continue his training under the direct view of the current Soshigan. His name was Goto Magobe, as well as its influence over Oi's political views of the world as well. So, so he introduced him and was in a training in the same dojo, the Chidokan Dojo, that was under Goto Magobe. He took a young Tosa warrior, Oi Masamichi, who had studied the Shimomura version, and introduced him now to a little more direct style, and more of a provincial style, which we call the Tanimura. And when he did that, he introduced him to Goto Magobe Masasuke. And he was the 16th generation headmaster of our style. His students served the emperor as fighting members of the Tosa forces during the Boshin War, 1867. So going back to the question that was asked earlier, students, most of his students in Tosa were part of that rebellion. Oe Sensei trained, and as well as Goto Sensei trained directly under Tanimura Kamenojo. Okay, he was the 15th headmaster, and he took part in a coup staged by the feudal lords of Tosa, Choshu, and Satsuma. So this is a Kamenojo here, the 15th generation. So we come down here, right, all the way down through. This is the 15th generation, and this is Goto Sensei. He was the next in line. Goto Sensei followed the Tosa samurai leader, Itagaki Taisuke, who then joined forces with Aritomo of Choshu and Okuma of Hizen. And they were administrators in reorganizing the building of the Meiji government. These men were all advocates of a national education system. And that's really important. They abhorred the old educational doctrines of learning by intuition that grew out of the Tokugawa's 260-year rule of land. In other words, only the hierarchy were allowed to have an education, and you had to learn it by just assimilation. In other words, there was no asking questions, you just had to be there and follow direction. They hated that way of training. They felt that it wasn't fair to everybody. And so in his time period, in that period, Goto Sensei, well, as he was before and after the Meiji Restoration, he gave out 5 Menkyo Kaiden. 5 Menkyo Kaiden. So if you look over here, you'll see all these had like one successor pretty much, right? But here he gave out 5 Menkyo Kaiden. So that's pretty forward thinking already. And because Goto was an advocate of the political evolution of reform of education, and with the help with all of the successors after that, he set Tosa Eishin-ryu on a new path into the future. So in 1898, Goto Sensei died, and he appointed Oe Masamichi Sensei as the 17th generation headmaster of Eishin-ryu. Right here. So of all these Menkyo Kaiden, he announced that he would be the next headmaster. Goto Sensei thought that much of Oe Sensei. The post-Meiji Reformation of Eishin was Oe Sensei was now considered the inheritor of both the Tanimuraha of Eishin under Goto Sensei, as we said, but he was also considered the 15th generation headmaster of the Shimomuraha. And so some documents list him as having been the 15th generation headmaster. This is a Shimomuraha. This is Goto Sensei. Oe Sensei was referred to the two separate lines of Tanimuraha and Shimomuraha. And if you look here, this was if you look at a line here, this was a Tanimuraha as it came down. Tanimura, they had two students here. And this man above them died quickly, early on, and left no named successor. And so the urban samurai over here, the Yamauchi, and a lot of the urban samurai, and the Chokokabe, the country samurai, were both saying their guy was the next Soke. And so there was a split in the style at that point. And so one came down this length to Oe Sensei, and Oe Sensei went before he was 15 studied over here and continued to study. And that came down, he was the 15th over here. So he was the 17th here and the 15th over here. So he got both parts of the style, the urban style, the country style, as one. So it's important that you understand that, because Oe was the Soke inheritor of both lines. And prior to Oe Sensei, both lines were referred to as Tosa Eishin. And both branches claimed to be solely responsible for teaching the orthodox method within Eishin province. His name designation of the two branches has survived today, Tanimuraha, Shimomuraha. Before Oe Sensei, those were not called those two things. They were just both Eishin, with a dispute of who was the king, okay? So due to Oe Sensei's political and Budo connection to the Yamauchi daimyo family, he was very close to Itagaki Sensei and Goto Sensei. He was appointed to be the teacher of Tosa Eishin to the Yamauchi daimyo family. So after all this, after the Meiji Restoration, the daimyo was still in charge. He still had power in the new government. Still had, quote unquote, royal blood there, if you want to think of it that way. And Oe Sensei was appointed to be the teacher of the Yamauchi family. In 1900, in the year 1900, he began teaching Kendo and Eishin at the Kochi branch of the Dai Nippon Butokugai and other local schools. And in 1924, actually, Oe Sensei became the second person after the Dai Nippon Butokugai was formed to be awarded the Hanshi in Iaido by the Dai Nippon Butokugai. Nakayama Hakudo was the first, and we'll talk about him a little bit later if we get around to another lecture, probably. Okay. Okay. This is Oe Sensei as an old man. A lot of you are probably very familiar with that, including the waza, right? Okay. The Dai Nippon Butokugai, in 1895, they established it, and literally it means the Greater Japan Martial Virtue Society. And it was established in Kyoto, Japan, under the supporting authority of the national government, and it had the endorsement of the Meiji Emperor. It was meant to solidify promote and standardize the martial disciplines and the systems of Japan. It was the very first official martial arts institute and premier governing body of Japan, sanctioned by the greater authority, a greater authority than just merely their Budo lineage. So the first time that the country got behind and was a certifying authority on Koru Budo. Okay, so that's very important for you to remember as well. The DNBK, it started out as a national Budo exhibition event for being observed by His Majesty the Emperor Meiji. Meiji would come to Butokuden, and all the DNBK would have to come there and demonstrate their Koru. However, its purpose shifted more toward the national level of a Budo organization over time, and it's pretty much outlined in a few main objectives. One of them, the first one, was the organizing of these Butokusai, these Budo festivals. And number two was they wanted to establish a Budo specialist school for education, for leadership and licensing. And they established what was known as the Budo Senman Gakko, which was a Budo teachers training college. It was a 2-year program, later went to 3. They also wanted to recognize Budo practitioners. And also then the fourth thing was they wanted to preserve traditional Bujitsu. Also, one of their main objectives was to research and publication on classical weapons and Bujitsu, so this information wouldn't be lost now that there were no more samurai. So this was this Dai Nippon Butokukai. It was overseen originally by the Imperial Prince. Hello?
You're okay.
Okay. The Imperial Prince of Japan was the commander of the Imperial Army. His name was oh God, let me see if I can get this right. Komatsumiya Akihito Shino. And he served the Dai Nippon Butokukai as the first supreme chair, or sosai. And consequently, the DNBK, because of he had imperial blood in him, he was one of the princes. The DNBK became the most prestigious headquarters endowed by the nation's leading experts in all disciplines of martial arts. And the DNBK established the Butokuden in Kyoto as a center for their training, research, licensing, and also any publication that they wanted to do. The Meiji government established and the DNBK established a Butokuden in each of the prefectures throughout Japan. So there was the main Butokuden in Kyoto, and then prefectural Butokudens, training centers in every province of Japan. And the Meiji government, they asked Oe Sensei, the DNBK asked Oe Sensei for his assistance in helping to establish a Dai Nihon Butokukai branch in Kochi. This was because Oe Sensei was the most important, most accomplished kendo practitioner, remember. Kendo practitioner and teacher and recognized authority of Tosa Iai. Oe Sensei was an educator, and he taught kendo also at several local middle schools, as well as the main Shidokan dojo, where all the other great Tosa masters are taught in Kochi. In 1900, he began teaching kendo, Tosa Eishin, and Kochi at the Butokuden in Kochi Prefecture. And in 1924, after the Taisho area, he became the second person after Nakayama Hakuto, as we discussed earlier, to get the Hanshi in Iai.
Sensei, before you go, there is a few questions forwarded to us by Frederick, Connie, and Ian.
Okay.
At one time, 10 young Tosa samurai had to commit seppuku. and Oe Masamichi sensei act as a kaishakunin.
That's correct.
What had they done exactly, and when was that?
Okay, so Oe Sensei was, again, you have to remember, at 15 years old, we were right in the middle of the Boshin War. And not everybody, there were still Tokugawa loyalists, including in Tosa-han, within the Yamauchi clan. And with the over 260 years, there were still loyalists within the Tosa warriors to the Tokugawa. And so what happened was, during that time period, during the right after, some of the Yamauchi, the Tosa warriors, before the Haito-rei had taken place, they formed like a society, and 10 of them were found out that they were going to try to get power back to the Tokugawa again. And so they were found out by the Yamauchi daimyo throughout the late Boshin War. And so what happened was, they had gone against the Yamauchi daimyo and against the Reformation. And so they were asked to commit seppuku, harakiri. And Oe Sensei at that time was 19 years old. So this is 4 years after the Battle of Toba Fushimi. He was 19. And already he was considered one of the greatest swordsmen in all of Tosa. And so those 10 guys all trained at the Chido-kan dojo in Kochi City. And so they all asked Oe Sensei if he would be the kaishaku, the one who ended their suffering for them. And on that day, it was a public execution of seppuku. And so one by one, each samurai would commit seppuku, and Oe Sensei would finish the coup de grace. And it got to be a real ugly affair. And a lot of townspeople were there. The daimyo was there. By the time they got to the 9th one, most people were sickened by it because they hadn't seen anything like that in years. And so the daimyo stopped the last one. And he was spared. And then later in life, by the way, he and Oe Sensei became very, very close friends. And Oe Sensei was traumatized by that day. And even in our curriculum today, we do kaishaku because Oe Sensei kept that as one of the primary waza in our style as tribute to those 9 men, his friends. That even though he was on the opposite side with them politically, just so that we all remember, mostly so he remembered. And by the way, the one guy that was spared, he opened up a bar in Kochi, and every day Oe Sensei would come home, he would stop there for free sake for the rest of his life. And his daughter would come with him, and he'd say, "Rub my head for good luck, because without your father, I wouldn't be here." Other questions, Kako?
Yes. Another question is, were there any women samurai? When did women start using swords in Japan?
So there were many women samurai. Some, as a matter of fact, all women born into the samurai caste, the samurai class, were considered samurai. I think what's really being asked is, did they carry 2 swords? And most women did not carry 2 swords. Most women carried a short sword or a tanto. And so even today, if you ever come across antique swords, and you see a tanto versus a wakizashi. Now, samurai a lot of times would carry wakizashi, but the tanto, women and merchants could carry, and so they put a lot of money into making very good tantos. A lot of women, samurai women, would learn naginata. Some, not a lot, but some actually fought on the battlefields with men, particularly during the Warring States period, or in defense of their families and their homes.
Like Tomoe Gozen.
I'm sorry?
Tomoe Gozen?
Tomori Gozen.
Tomoe
Oh,
Gozen.
exactly. Correct. Yep, she was one.
Another question is, do you think that having multiple Menkyo Kaidens was a problem for the art's survival?
Do I think it was a problem having? No, actually, I think it's probably what saved it. You have to realize that after the Meiji Restoration, all people were commoners. Some were aristocrats, but they were all equal. And so when it came time to conscript people into the military, or it came time to go to war, many great samurai, many great Tosa, many Eishin great swordsmen went off to war and died. And that would have included, if there was only one Menkyo Kaiden, the chances of the survival would have been very slim, especially over many wars throughout the last 2 to 3 centuries. And so to keep things going, you need several streams, right? You plant seeds everywhere. Not all trees grow from all seeds. And so many of the Menkyo Kaiden didn't have any lines. Even though there were many Menkyo Kaiden after Oi Sensei, not all of them propagated a line. And so some were great martial artists, but not great teachers. Some were politically motivated. Some people have financial and monetary motivation. And so they chase students away. They can't get anybody. So no, I think many Menkyo Kaiden is what's allowed it to survive today and will into the future as well.
Thank you.
Is that it?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
At this point.
Thank you. So in keeping with the modern mission of a Japanese Ministry of Education, and more so the liberal political movement of his teachers and the Meiji government, Oi Sensei renounced his position as the 15th headmaster of the Shimamura-ha. And rather than fuel controversy over leadership, he combined the teachings methods of the Tanimura-ha and the Shimamura-ha lines that he learned from Godo Sensei and Shimamura Sensei directly. They're both 2 of his teachers, right? And then he decided to rename the style Muso Jikiden Eishin, which means a peerless, direct transmission style of Eishin. So I want to explain what that means. Muso Jikiden Eishin, peerless, direct transmission style. Peerless, peerless doesn't mean he was peerless or unequaled. What it means in our style is that the unequaled way, there's no other way, better way of passing on this except through direct transmission from one heart to another heart. Jikiden, direct transmission, can only happen between one person, one teacher, and their student, direct heart to heart, which is why when we decided to do this, I was quite hesitant. It's been our tradition through centuries now to have one-on-one contact. Skinship, as my teachers always called it. Skinship is how we get Jikiden. Muso, unequal way of passing along one heart to another, the style of Eishin. And so that's how Oi Sensei decided to rename the style. And he rearranged the curriculum to preserve this tradition and then disseminate it to a wider audience. Oe Sensei, he renamed many of the waza, called them by different names. And then he reorganized the school between the curriculum of the school between 1912 and 1926 during the Taisho era. So if you look over here, this is what, I know it's hard, Muso, Jikiden, Eishin, right? But this is what these are the names of the waza that Oe made as a curriculum after the Meiji Restoration and during between 1912 and 1926. So it was quite a change from what they'd done before. This restructuring of these waza entailed categorizing the waza of Tosa Eishinru by the heiho, or the strategy that each one represented. And then he reduced the number of the waza that they had before that. He reduced the number from 160 different waza to a more manageable number. And Oe Sensei then reorganized them into the following. So if you look up here, he took that 160 and he decided to create 11 seated waza, which represented the Omori-ru, and he called those the Shoden waza. And then 10 Chuden waza reflected the kneeling waza of Hasagawa Eishin Sensei. Then for his Okuden seated waza, he took the founder of Shimei Muso-ru, Hayashizaki Sensei's Tatehiza waza, and incorporated 8 of those into that set. As most of you know, the seniors, he added also the 13 standing Okuden sets of Hayashizaki Sensei, and those are considered our highest level of training. And then with the Kumitachi, of the original 45 Kumitachi sets, they were maintained. So there were originally 45, remember, but Oe Sensei created an additional 7. And then he added those to the 45. And so the new curriculum, had 52 paired Kenjutsu kata. So the new practice included a method of practicing also all of the Tate Hiza Nobu, that's those Chuden waza. He also created a single form for that that's called a Hayanuki, and that's kind of outside what most people learn. And he also added the Bangai Nobu. Remember the set of 4 waza outside of the curriculum that harkens back to that time as a 15-year-old when he killed 6 guys. So he added those and he created what was called the Oe Kata, the Bangai Nobu, and the things that are outside of the normal curriculum. Okay. So although he retained many of the original techniques, he did change the names of some of the waza that we do today so that we could better understand what they meant, directions and whatnot. And many of his students went on, and they went on to spread Eishin Rui way beyond Tosa, and way throughout Japan, and obviously, in time outside of Japan as well. Lisa, so you have a question again?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The following questions came from Sue Warzik, Jeff Kozel, Terry Albert.
Okay.
First question is, how Oe Sensei codified the sets taught in middle school?
I'm sorry?
How Oe Sensei codified the sets taught in the middle school.
Oh, so Oe Sensei taught at the 2 middle schools, actually, Kochi Ichu and Kochi Nichu, which later kind of combined, he taught there, but he taught Kendo. And so he was primarily, all children at that time learned Kendo in their sports program in the middle school. And so he spent a lot of time teaching Kendo. Once you were proficient at Kendo, then you could petition Oe Sensei to become an EI practitioner. And so a lot of his young EI practitioners from the middle school were good Kendo practitioners as well. So he took a lot of the movement that the Kendo practitioners had already been doing, and he adapted the older Eishinru Kumitachi to that type of body movement. So it would be easier for them to learn the EI kumitachi paired sets.
Okay. Next question. Are or were there any waza that were once part of our curriculum but no longer are?
Yeah, there were a lot. And, part of the curriculum, and that's kind of that's a trick question in many ways, because those waza are still a part of Eishin. What they're not is a part of the formalized curriculum that's taught to everyone. So many of them show up in what are known as kai waza today. Many of them show up, the waza have been, the waza sometimes, the old waza would mimic the waza that are done in our kumitachi sets now. So he eliminated the waza part, but it kept those techniques within the kumitachi.
Okay. Another question. Is there a story behind a waza or historical significance?
So every waza has a story. Okay. People over time add waza when they worked. And so each waza that has remained and passed through today, someone's life was probably taken. And many lives were probably taken prior to that, before they learned how to do the waza. But each waza has a lot of blood on it in the past. Somebody had sacrificed greatly. And because it works, it was then incorporated as something that a warrior could do.
Along the same line, what are the key skills that waza is intended to teach?
So waza are techniques. Waza are not kata, so to speak. Waza teach fundamentals. They teach how to become one with the sword, so that later on you can, it's like when you learn how to grab a pencil and you learn to write your alphabet. So when you're finally able to print the alphabet, those are all the fundamentals, all the kihon. Once that's able to do, then you start to learn how to write in cursive and put those things together. So if you think of the waza as individual letters, the alphabet, you can think of writing words in cursive as being what we then move into is the kumitachi, where the waza are fit together.
Okay. Thank you, Sensei.
You're welcome. Okay, I'd like to move on here a little bit. I want you to know that Oe Sensei taught throughout Kochi Prefecture, but he also traveled extensively and gave instruction in Osaka and in Kyoto. And that was a big deal, because prior to the Meiji Restoration, Tosa teachers only taught Tosa warriors. And even into the Taisho area, after the Meiji Restoration, many of Oe Sensei's students and Menkyo Kaiden that he gave out refused to teach anybody outside of Tosa. In fact, Nakayama Akudo who came to Tosa, to Oe Sensei to learn from him, he turned him down. He said, "Yeah, I can't teach you. You're from the big city." And he goes, "You can come around and watch me. I'm going to give some demos, and you can steal what you can, but I won't teach you." And many of the Menkyo Kaiden, after the turn of the Taisho era, still were not happy about Oe Sensei teaching people outside in Kyoto and Osaka. In fact, they got real upset with Masaoka Sensei because he had done that as well. So just so you know, he traveled around a lot. He had educated many excellent swordsmen, and many of them had their own ideas about the techniques too. So some developed their own kaiwaza or alternatives, and they shaped their own Eishin styles after that. And that was fine with him. Oe Sensei lived to be pretty old, as you can see, and not as old as Itagaki, but he was 75, and he died in 1927. And several of his students carried on the Eishin tradition of the Tanimura-ha. This is Sensei's grave in Kochi. he gave permission, which in Eishin or in the Tanimura tradition, that's called the Konga no Kon or the Konga no Maki. And he gave a license to 16 different swordsmen. So in Oe Sensei's life, he gave Menkyo to at least 16 that we know of. And there may have been many, many more than that, but those are the ones that we're sure about. After his death, Sensei, a lot of people question who is going to become the next headmaster out of some of Oe's students, but no one had been named, and no one was ever considered the Soke after that anywhere. It was no Ishisoden, no one line. It was very much along the lines of the Ministry of Education and a new political thinking that education is for everyone. And so if you have all the information, then you have the right to teach it, okay? So he was truly a man of the 19th century, but also one who forged a new direction for the old Koru in the 20th century as well. Sensei, you got another question there?
Yes. What is the relationship between Muso Jikiden Eishin Ryu and Muso Shinden Ryu?
Oh, okay. So Muso Jikiden Eishin Ryu was Tosa Iai that Oe Sensei combined the Shimomura Ha and the Tanimura Ha, as we just talked about. Muso Shinden-ryu was a style developed by the name of Nakayama Hakudo, this guy who came to train with Oe Sensei, and Oe Sensei turned him away. So Hakudo Sensei was, Nakayama Hakudo Sensei was a very proficient swordsman, studied many other styles of swordsmanship before he came there, and he's very talented kendoka as well. And so he carried a lot of power in Edo and what later became Tokyo, and but he still wasn't allowed. He's an outsider to Tosa, so he wasn't allowed. So what he did was he followed Oe Sensei around, but he got introduced to one of the other Menkyo Kaiden. His name was Morimoto, and Morimoto kind of took him under his wing and taught him some of the Tanimura Ha. At the same time, he'd gone over to Shimomura Sensei's group, the Shimomura line, and he trained there as well. And there's a little bit of story about the Shimomura Ha, and that is that later down the line, some of the Menkyo were not original. And so he never actually received, he learned the system, but he never actually received a Menkyo Kaiden from the Shimomura Ha. But Morimoto over on the Tanimura Ha side gave him a Menkyo Kaiden under the table, so to speak. So the story is he was doing a demonstration at the Butokuden in 1935 in Kyoto. And unfortunately for him, there was several other sokes of Muso Jikiden Eishin-ryu there and Tanimura Ha. And since he didn't have a Menkyo Kaiden specifically written down from the Shimomura Ha, he decided it would be a lot easier just to rename his style right there that day. And so he called it Muso Shinden-ryu, from Shinmei Muso-ryu, the founder style. So he took the Shimomura Ha and took those techniques, and from that day forward, he started changing the kata a little bit and making it his own style.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
So there's the dirt too.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on here, we said that the mission of Oe Sensei was to spread his EI to Japan and further regions. But you have to understand that right from the very start, even though we call it Muso Jikiden Eishin now, right from the very start, from Hayashizaki Shigenobu, the Bato Jitsu, we've used a system, what was called Ishi, there was no Ishi Soden. We have a system of indiscriminate transmission. Even the very founder of EI gave out many Kongo no Kon to other people. So the first 6 and 7 headmasters, a lot of them actually trained with Hayashizaki. They weren't in succession. Hayashi Rokudayo, the 9th generation grandmaster, he wrote a book called Iai Jitsu Hiden, and it's the first time that anybody ever listed them in relative importance. But they all had trained, and they were all given headmasters of their whatever they want to do. Once they mastered the style, they could teach it to anybody they wanted to. There was no single line. That's really started with Hayashi Rokudayo when he wrote Iai Jitsu Hiden. Okay, so up until that time, again, it was an indiscriminate transmission, and that allowed anyone in possession of full transmission to award licenses to any other number of students that he wanted to do. So therefore, it is possible that there were multiple unlisted holders of Menkyo Kaiden, known in Eishin as a Kongo no Kon, throughout history. Okay, this could happen in a case of any generation, from the first all the way down to the 21st. Okay, and but also it was due in part to Oe Sensei's more open and inclusive approach to teaching. Okay, Eishin, the lineage of groups currently practicing the art is pretty diverse and complex. And Oe Hanshi must have felt it was very important to make those changes in order to preserve the core values and teaching of Eishin, as we were talking before. And not just to select a few, but to open a study of Eishin for future generations too. He taught many students, and through his teaching, some of his students became extremely accomplished and respected at Iaidoka throughout Japan. And these students sometimes were known as Oe Monka, and meaning under the family of Oe. This is Oe here. And there were many. There was Masaoka Kazumi, Hokiyama Namio, Mori Shigeki. These are all Menkyo Kaiden holders under Oe Sensei. Kono Hyakyuan, Yamamoto Harusuke. Those are just to name a few of them. And so from these accomplished and talented students of Oe, several of them, those that you see right there that are left, okay, several have been called and recognized as Juhachidai. Juhachidai, it's 10, 8, and successor. Okay, so the 18th successor by various Budo federations throughout Japan. So 18th generation master denotes that these individuals are recognized and respected by their reputation and ability, and to carry on the Eishin tradition. So federations, Dai Nippon Butokukai, Kendo Renmei, Iaido Renmei, so they pick and recognize who they want to lead Eishin within that federation. And so in our federation, the Dai Nippon Butokukai, in this time, they recognize Masaoka Sensei, Narise Sensei, Miura Sensei, right on down the line. Other federations, Kendo Renmei or Iaido Renmei or Iaido Federation, whatever, they have recognized legitimate Juhachidai and have recognized them as being legitimate successors. Not only successor, but legitimate successors. Some that were formed strictly by Eishin masters, some have claimed that they are the only ones because they happen to own the organization, okay? So 16 of Oe's most influential students received the Kongo no Maki, the scroll of a direct transmission. Sensei, another question, go ahead.
Yes, does Muso Jikiden Eishin still issue any Menkyo license, or has it completely converted to the Dan ranking system?
So during the Meiji Restoration, and once the Ministry of Education was formed, some of the older styles, some of the older members, particularly the Tosa Eishin. So when I say Tosa Eishin, today Tosa Eishin, people who call Tosa Eishin, so if you look over here, you'll see Yamanouchi Toyoaki. See it right here? That was the Yamanouchi daimyo family. And so through that family, they had a tendency to want to hold on to the Tosa Eishin name. Some of them have adopted the Muso Jikiden, but most of them still issue Kongo no Kon, Kongo no Maki, those type of things. Some of the other styles still do, but Oe Sensei, truly, he issued a few, but we haven't issued many in a long, long time. For example, Oe Sensei received a Kyoshi license and a Hanshi license, and even during the early 1900s, when he was writing out the Kongo no Kon, on the Kongo no Kon, if you look at the Kongo no Kon, Oe Sensei, in the middle of it, when he got promoted and issued the Kyoshi Shogo, he started writing Kyoshi Oe Masamichi. On the very same scroll later that he wrote again to the same guy, once he was promoted to Hanshi, he wrote Hanshi. So he started issuing those and allowed the Butokukai to issue the Kyoshi and Hanshi licenses as Menkyo Kaiden.
Okay. Another question. This is by Jeff Kozo. What principle or concept within Budo, in your opinion, is the most difficult for Western culture studying Eastern martial arts to understand or grasp?
Oh,
do we need a drink?
So, without offending anyone, I'm just going to be real honest with this. Loyalty, obligation, ongiri is probably the most difficult thing for Westerners to grasp. The fact that there can be something, there can be an art form that has been passed down through all these generations. And so if I asked any of you to go back and without looking at the paper, give me the names of the 21 headmasters that preceded you, chances are you probably couldn't do it. But for most of you, if I asked you to give me the names of the waza of the Shoden set, the Chuden set, the Okuden set, some of you Okuden Sawari set, and all of the Kumitachi, you could do that. Because those have outlived 21 generations of samurai, of Tosa, Muso, Jikiden, Eishin practitioners. Each generation is a steward. We don't own it. We're just keeping it for the next generation. We're keeping it alive, and it's passing through us like blood to the next generation, from heart to heart to heart. And that's the hardest thing to get Westerners to understand.
Thank you, Sensei.
Other questions?
Not right now, Sensei.
Okay. So our Muso Jikiden Eishin taught today, it traces its lineages back to one of these men, one of these 16 that Oe Sensei I gave the Kongo no Kon to. And Oe Masamichi Hanshi, right here, his tradition continued through one line. He was the 17th Soshihan, right? Remember that? And tradition passed one through one that today is recognized by the Dai Nippon Butokukai, and that was his name was Masaoka Kasumi, and we'll talk about him at a future lecture if you still want to do these. And Masaoka Sensei also passed it on to the 19th generation Grandmaster. That was Narisi Sakahiro, and we'll talk about him in the future as well. And then after Narisi Sensei passed away, which is quite fast after Masaoka passed away, Narisi passed away very quickly. The leadership then, according to the KNBK, went from him to Miura Takayuki Hitofusa. They were senpai kohai. They were both senpai kohai under Masaoka sensei. And so once he passed away, the mantle went to Miura sensei. And then to my other teacher, Shimabukuro Masayuki, who, and as you both, most of you know, they passed within 4 months of each other in 2012. I just want you to know that I am I'm so grateful to have had the great fortune of knowing these two men. I can hear their voices in every waza, every kata that I practice, every kata that I see our students practice. I can hear their voices talking. They're in their voice. Fix this, fix that. They're still alive. And but now we need to add another generation, right? We got the 20th generation. Oh, he's the 21st. I'm sorry. It should be at 21st and not the 20th. I'm sorry. But we need to add another generation to the history of our style, and that's the 22nd generation, and that's you, all of you. You are the stewards into the future. Without you, there is no Muso Jikiden Nation Masaoka Den, Masaoka line. There is none. And so, from the bottom of my heart, to each and every one of you, I just want to say thank you. Thank you all. Without you, none of this could ever happen. And so with that, I'd like to move back to just thanking Lee Sensei as well for allowing this to happen, and thank all of you for your support. Not just now, through these hard times with the COVID, but for the last 8 years. Okay, Kako, I'm gonna leave it up to you.
Yes. Let me ask another last question that I have been, one of Joe Weil forwarded to me.
Okay.
How do you feel REI as it stands right now would appear to various Soke and Soshihan throughout art lineage?
I think it probably would appear the way it's appeared in their time. Of course, you know, Oe Sensei changed some of the technique and way of doing them, modified some of the ways that he wanted to. Every Soshihan has the right to do that. So even within the different lines today, you will see different Eishin. Even back then, you know, before the Meiji Restoration, there were different dojos, different teachers. I think every one of you know that you can go around every dojo in the KNBK and you're going to see a little variation, much to my chagrin, but it's always going to be the way. That's the way it's always been that way. I would say if there's one thing that they might think is that we're a lot prettier in our waza. I have seen some of the old film of some of the old waza, and it's pretty ugly, but it was meant for a very ugly application. One of the things that that Miura Sensei and Shimokuro Sensei drilled into me heavily, and if this is a little ugly for you, you can close your ears, but one of the things I remember succinctly is that as I got a little bit more experienced, Sensei said, "Oh, Carl-san, if you really want to do real EI, when you do the waza, when you do the kata, you have to see the blood. You have to see the ugliness of what combat is in your mind. You have to see it. You have to see the outcome. This is not meant to be pretty. And as you get older, you just have to be effective. It's nice to be pretty, but pretty means nothing if it doesn't cut. And so one of the things we do try to do, Joe, is we try to maintain that Koryu attitude. Koryu means Koryu versus Gendai. Koryu arts are for warriors that have already decided that one of us is going to die. It's not about self-defense. Gendai, many modern martial arts about becoming a better person, learning self-defense, but Koryu Budo, at its heart, is service to others, and allowing and being willing right up front to lay your life down. If it's worth fighting for, it's worth dying for. And so I think that much EI that's seen today, Joe, is probably missing some of that, because it's become more of a physical exercise, a Budo, only for self-actualization, but not usually for use.
Thank you, Sensei. There are a few questions that came up to the chat.
Okay.
One from John Martin.
Okay.
His question is, did the 8 kneeling waza embody a specific teacher?
Yes, the 8 kneeling waza in the Okuden, Okuden Iwaza we call them, they were from the Shinmei, the Hayashizaki, Shinmei Hayashizaki route, the founders route. And so if you go back and look at those, you'll find that was an influence, techniques from Hayashizaki sensei that were modified over time to fit the katana rather than the tachi.
Okay. Another question is coming from Matt King. Did our Tameshigiri sets change with Oe Sensei's restructuring of the ryu?
The Tameshigiri sets. No, the sets that you're doing, if you're talking about the patterns, I'm assuming, Matt, you're talking about the patterns that we do. Those patterns were actually added into our curriculum, the way we do them, by Shimabukuro Sensei and myself, as far as drills go.
Is there any other questions from the audience? Sorry, I can't see the whole Brady Bunch screen, so if you do, please open the mic to ask the question, please.
Sensei, it seems like Masaoka Sensei forward didn't necessarily share Oe Sensei's sensibility on not really naming a successor. Is that true? And did they have a different philosophy behind that?
Oh no, that's not true.
Oh, okay.
That's not true. No, of course. As an example, Masaoka Sensei had several students that belong to other federations today that are propagating a line. Also, Miura Sensei has several Hachidan Hanshi that have been extended from him. The DMBK recognizes Shimbukuro Sensei as the senior of that line. And unfortunately, as far as Shimabukuro Sensei goes, Sensei apologized that he didn't have enough time. I think he would have had many people Menkyo Kaiden down the road. He wanted that for everyone. Sensei came to this country because he knew that United States was a melting pot from all over the world. He could create, good swordsmen and Menkyo Kaiden to go out to their own countries, just like Oe Sensei did and Masaoka Sensei did.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sensei, Ian Peterson here.
Hi there, Ian.
What is your favorite kata?
My favorite kata.
Yes.
Well, over the years, it's changed a lot. The favorite kata I have probably, I mean, I'd like to say mai, but that's just not true. My favorite kata, to be honest with you, is one that we call shiho barai.
Okay.
Shiho barai is one of the bangai nobu that comes the outside of the curriculum that Oe Sensei created. And shiho barai has a lot of spiritual significance to it. And so I've been called upon occasionally to perform that in some international federation Butokusai. And so that's probably, I get a lot from shiho barai. Sometimes it's called akuma barai.
When you say spiritual, does that come from the bunkai of it or the meaning of where it came from?
Okay, so, well, so I can see other people laughing here. So shiho barai is sweeping the four corners. It literally means to sweep the four corners, but it was also used as in Shinto. In Japan, the Shinto religion is in many different aspects of the society, and at Butokusai or in dojos or whatnot, they would, before you allow people to train, you want to sweep away all the bad juju in the room that may have accumulated over the years. And so that's called harai no gi. Harai no gi. Harai means to sweep. Harai barai, sweep. No gi, the etiquette of sweeping all the bad spirits out of the dojo in four directions. Okay, and so shiho barai, when it's done in that way, it's called akuma barai. Akuma means devil or demon. So akuma barai, when it's done as akuma barai, it means that you're sweeping all the demons to the four directions to make the dojo safe for all of your comrades, for all of their training, so no one gets hurt.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Sensei Brad has the question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you want me to ask him directly? Okay.
Of course.
Okay. What do you believe is the best way to keep investment or establish investment in martial arts using history?
I'm sorry, one more time, Brad.
What do you believe is the best way to keep investment or to establish investment in martial arts using history?
So your greatest investment in Budo is the time you put in on the floor. And I don't mean that in a naive way.
Mm-hmm.
All of us have a finite number of sands in our hourglass, and we never get it back again, Brad. So that's the true investment. When you're young, you've got that much on the top and that much on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're my age, it's just the opposite. But each grain of sand, whether they're mine or yours, they're literally, they're a treasure. There's no price you can put on each moment that you spend on a dojo floor. Each moment you take away from your family to be there. In your last days, if you could buy all those time back, you'd spend everything you accumulated in your life to get another day, another 24 hours with your family. And so that time that you invest on the dojo floor is not just your time. It's the time that's running out that is literally invaluable. You can't put a price tag on it. So that's your investment. That's been the investment of every human being that stepped and passed this on to you, has spent all that time in their lives investing each sand through that hourglass so that we can do it today. So that's how we invest. And that's how we keep that treasure.
Thank you, Long Sensei.
Thank you, Brad.
Any other questions? Oh, Morgan, go.
Sensei, you spoke about the provincial and the kind of urban mindset or development or evolution of Tanimura and Shimamura-ha.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I'd ever heard you describe it in that way. And in a broad sense, I've always distinguished one as being more offensive and another being somewhat more defensive. But I imagine it's a lot more subtle than that. Could you expound a little bit upon that? How the
Sure.
mindset and the techniques are maybe distinct?
Certainly. So the Goshi, after the 11th generation Grandmaster, when it split between the two groups within Kochi and Tosa, the one side, they were all doing the same techniques, Morgan. They were all doing what we can today call Tanimura-ha, Shimamura-ha. Okay? That was all Tosa Eishin root. What happened is over a period of several generations, when and where they taught the fundamentals started to change. So on one side, one group of teachers felt that the Tanimura-ha Nukitsuke in the way of blocking, that aggressive way, was better to teach that first. Over on the Shimamura-ha side, they were a little more refined. They weren't going to be the first foot soldiers on the battlefield, if you know what I mean. And so they felt that they could teach a little more defensive technique first. And so that wasn't something that happened overnight. That happened over successive generations, to where Oe Sensei could look back and say, they're both this, we teach them both eventually, but there's no reason why we have to do that. We can teach them all at the same time, like they were done way back when.
That's really
because one was called Tosa. They were both called Tosa Eishin. They weren't called Shimamura and Tanimura. That was a name that Oe Sensei used for both lines.
So in a sense, then he, in his inclusive way, kind of combined the class mindset.
Exactly. And by renaming this style, he took power away from that.
Really a man.
He's quite a man.
Thank you, Sensei.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining us. And I apologize, it became 20 minutes over the time. But thank you very much for sharing your time and investing your time with us. At this point, if Sensei agrees, next virtual lecture will be on the July 25th, which will be the last Saturday of each month. So you know exactly when is the next one. It's the last Saturday of the month. And
excuse me, Kako,
yes.
I'd like to say, first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us here, and let's not forget that I really appreciate the seniors wanting to put this together for the reasons they did, and that was to support Hambu and to support each of you in your training when we can't get together. However, if you want to do this again, let Lee Sensei know, okay? Because as I was telling Brad earlier, your time is very important. And I don't want to waste it when you could be doing something else. And, you know, you could be spending your time and with your families or doing something better. So, or you didn't get something from this. So please communicate with Lee Sensei and let her know if you think this was a valuable thing for us. I mean, if you look at this, I see all these faces. How many people? How many people are here? And so if you took all of us 2 hours, how many man hours is that? from our families. So we have to invest wisely, okay? So if you think it's an investment for us, then that's fine. But if you don't, be honest, okay? Please be honest. I really want you to let us know if this is something you want to do again. Thank you, Kako.
Thank you, Sensei. Yes, and if you have any questions or a topic that you want to forward it to me, because what I have been doing is the compiling all the questions and the topics that interest you, such as like a philosophy, what's the principle of Koryu or the traditional way. So that will provide us any insights of what your interest, and we'll try to accommodate your interest and with having better lectures in the future, if that's what you want to pursue. Okay, and thank you so much again for your time. We could not have done this without your support, and then we really appreciate it. And again, if you have any questions, please communicate to me. So we'll do our best. Okay.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you very much. And I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Sensei. That
Thank
was
you, Sensei.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Lirachi.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Sensei.
And thank you for the European colleague. I know it's past your bedtime.
Oh, also before we go, so once a month we have a KNBK
Happy hour.
happy hour. Okay, no charge. You have to bring your own booze. It's a BYOB. Okay, we have a Zoom happy hour. So